My name is Senna Holbrook, and I'm 29 years old. Until 8 months ago, I was the proud owner of Clover Crumb, the bakery my Aunt Agnes built from the ground up over 32 years. My uncle and my cousin demanded I hand over half the business. When I refused, they did something so calculated and deliberate that I still struggle to believe real people are capable of it. And what the judge uncovered during our trial didn't just change my life. It exposed a lie that had been buried inside my family for decades. But none of this makes sense without Agnes first. My aunt was my father's older sister, and she was the kind of woman who made everything look effortless, even when it wasn't. She never married, never had children, and never seemed to regret either of those things. She opened Clover Crumb when she was 26 with a $3,000 loan from my grandfather and a rented storefront the size of a one-car garage. By the time I was born, the whole neighborhood knew it. People came for the honey lavender scones on Saturday mornings, and stayed because the place felt like somewhere you actually belonged. I started spending summers there when I was 8. My parents were going through a rough financial stretch, and my aunt offered to take me for June and July. I think she was doing my mother a quiet favor. But what she gave me in those 2 months every year was something I didn't have words for then. She taught me how to laminate dough, how to feel when a custard was about to break, how to manage a morning rush without losing your temper. She treated me like a colleague from the beginning, not a child underfoot. A bakery isn't just product, she told me once, dusting flour off her apron while the morning light came in through the front windows. It's trust. People come back because they trust it'll taste the same way it did the first time they loved it. You protect that, you protect everything. I carried those words through culinary school. I carried them through 4 years of working in other people's kitchens. And when I came back to my hometown at 25, I walked into Clover Crumb not as a summer kid, but as my aunt's assistant manager. We ran it together for 4 years. She taught me the vendor relationships, the seasonal adjustments, the exact butter ratio in the shortbread she refused to write down anywhere. I was her right hand and she was the mentor I'd been quietly measuring every other person against for my entire working life. My aunt was diagnosed with a progressive heart condition when I was 27. She didn't slow down much at first, that wasn't her. But over the following year I started taking on the early openings, the ordering, the staff scheduling. She trusted me completely, and I knew it. What I didn't know was that she had quietly updated her will. She passed on a Thursday morning in early spring at home, with a hospice nurse beside her. She was 61. I found out by phone, sitting in a supplier's parking lot, and I cried so hard I couldn't drive for 40 minutes. The funeral was small because she wanted it that way. No reception, no flowers beyond the arrangement the Clover Crumb staff put together themselves. She had left instructions, and those instructions were followed. What came next I was completely unprepared for. 2 weeks after the funeral, I sat in the office of my aunt's attorney, a quiet, careful woman named Ms. Ames. On one side of the conference table sat my Uncle Roy, my father's estranged older brother, and his son, my cousin Huck. I had not seen either of them more than a handful of times in my entire life. Roy had cut ties with the family years ago over something no one ever fully explained to me. He and my aunt had not been close, not since I could remember. Ms. Ames read the will in a measured voice. There were small bequests to longtime employees and a donation to a local food bank my aunt had supported for years. And then, the bakery, the building, the business, the equipment, the recipe archive, the apartment above the shop, all of it left to me. Huck's chair scraped back from the table before Ms. Ames finished the sentence. "That's impossible," he said. He was 34, taller than I remembered, with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no in a way that actually stuck. She had family, real family. My uncle was quieter but no less cold. He looked at me across the table and said very evenly, "You're not even her child." "Neither are you," I said. I didn't mean it to land as hard as it did, but I wasn't going to apologize for it. Ms. Ames noted that the will had been signed and witnessed 18 months prior, with full documentation of my aunt's mental competency. My uncle asked whether it could be contested. Ms. Ames told him his options were limited and, in her professional opinion, unlikely to succeed. He did not like that answer. What followed was 3 months I still have difficulty describing without sounding like I'm exaggerating. My uncle called me within 48 hours. He didn't shout, that wasn't his style. He made the whole thing sound reasonable, almost generous. My aunt wouldn't have wanted the family divided, he said. Huck had struggled financially and deserved a foundation. Surely I could see that an equal split was the fair thing. I told him that my aunt had made her wishes clear, and I intended to honor them. He said, "That's a mistake, Senna." Huck was less measured. He showed up at Clover and Crumb on a Saturday morning, our busiest morning of the week, and stood at the counter asking to speak with me in a voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. When I came out of the kitchen, he announced to the dining room that the bakery should have been divided among family and that I had manipulated a sick woman into leaving me everything. 3 customers walked out without paying. 2 others stayed, looked at me carefully, and then went back to their coffee. I asked him to leave. He did eventually, but not before he'd rattled every person on my staff. That night I filed for a restraining order. It was granted, based on witness statements from 2 of my employees who had been there. The harassment didn't stop, it shifted. My uncle began calling our wholesale suppliers, suggesting there were ongoing management disputes that might affect our ability to pay invoices on time. 2 vendors reached out to ask what was going on. Huck created a string of fake online reviews claiming customers had gotten sick from our pastries. I spent hours every week submitting disputes to get them removed. But I kept the shop open. I kept every one of my aunt's classic recipes exactly as she'd made them. I introduced a seasonal rotating menu that brought in a younger crowd without losing the people who'd been coming for 20 years. Within 2 months, Clover and Crumb's weekend brunch reservations were running a 3-week wait. A regional food magazine ran a feature on us. Business was better than it had ever been. That was when things moved from harassment into something I hadn't anticipated. I should tell you about Prue first, because she matters to everything that came after. Prudence Farlow had been my aunt's head baker for 11 years. She was 43, meticulous, and had a memory for recipes I genuinely envied. She had known my aunt before I came back to work there, and she had watched me grow from the nervous 25-year-old with a culinary degree who still asked permission to adjust the lamination technique. When my aunt got sick, Prue and I had run the bakery together so seamlessly that customers often assumed we were co-owners. She was my closest friend in that kitchen, and after my aunt died, she was my anchor in every practical sense of the word. It was Prue who noticed it first. We held a standing wholesale account with a hotel downtown, 54 units of assorted pastries every Tuesday and Thursday, a solid contract with reliable income. In late October, about 5 months after the funeral, we received a call from the hotel's food and beverage director. Guests had reported stomach issues after eating our pastries on a Thursday delivery. The hotel was pulling the order pending investigation. I was sick with worry. We ran through everything: the ingredient sourcing, the prep logs, the cold chain documentation. Nothing pointed to any failure on our end. Our batch records were clean. But the health department came anyway, because the hotel had filed a formal complaint, and we were required to close for 3-day dues while they conducted their inspection. What the inspector found was not in our records. In the dry storage room, a bag of almond flour, opened and resealed, showing clear signs of contamination. The lot number didn't match any of our purchase orders. It had not come from our supplier. Someone had put it there. I stood in that storage room and felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I thought about Huck. I thought about the Thursday 3 weeks earlier when I'd arrived late due to a delivery issue and Prue had opened alone, and a man had come to the back door claiming to be from our pest control company, which didn't have a scheduled visit that day. She had turned him away, she told me later, but he'd stayed near the alley entrance for a while before finally leaving. We reported the contaminated flour to the police. The detective assigned, a methodical woman named Detective Suarez, took our report seriously. But before her investigation could move, something else surfaced. Prue found the document. She had been helping me reorganize my aunt's business files. We were migrating to a new accounting system and digitizing several years of records. In a folder marked insurance, she found a policy amendment, filed 4 months earlier, 1 month before my aunt's death. It listed my cousin as a secondary beneficiary entitled to 50% of any business interruption payout in the event of a covered closure. My signature was on it. I had never signed it. I stared at that document for a long time. The signature looked close. Not exact, but close enough that someone moving quickly might not look twice. Whoever had forged it had studied how I write my name. Prue's jaw was tight when she finally looked up. "This is what they were building toward," she said. "Shut you down long enough to trigger the insurance. Collect the payout. They were never going to stop on their own." I called Ms. Ames that afternoon. She connected me with a litigation attorney named Mr. Harden, who had a reputation for not taking cases he didn't believe in and not losing the ones he did. Within 48 hours I was sitting in his office with the forged document, the contaminated flour report, Detective Suarez's preliminary findings, and 4 months of saved voicemails, texts, and emails from my uncle and cousin. Mr. Hardin reviewed everything without saying much. Then he looked up and said, "We're filing criminal charges and a civil suit. Are you ready for this to get loud?" I thought about my aunt in that kitchen. I thought about what she had built over 32 years, alone, from nothing. I thought about the employees who had stayed loyal through all of this, and the customers who had kept coming back even during the closure. "Yes," I said. The arrests came on a Tuesday. Detective Suarez called to tell me my uncle and cousin were in custody. The security camera I had installed above the alley entrance after Huck's outburst at the counter, because my aunt had only kept cameras at the front entrance and I'd decided to expand the system, had captured a man matching my cousin's build entering the alley at 5:47 in the morning before we opened. A second camera belonging to the auto shop at the end of the block had captured a partial plate on a vehicle matching my uncle's registered car. The forensic examination of the forged insurance document found evidence that a light table had been used to trace my signature. My uncle's home office, searched under warrant, contained that light table. It also contained printed copies of documents bearing my authentic signature that he had clearly been using as practice. My mother called when the news broke locally. After a long pause, she said, "I always knew Roy was capable of something ugly. I just didn't think he'd go this far." My father didn't call, he sent a text, "Keep going." I held on to that. The trial began in September, 6 months after the arrests. Sitting across from my uncle and cousin in that courtroom, actually sitting across from them, close enough to hear them shift in their seats, was one of the more disorienting experiences of my life. My uncle looked diminished somehow, like the composed version of himself I'd seen at the will reading had been a sustained performance that was finally running out of fuel. My cousin kept his eyes forward and did not look at me once. Mr. Hardin laid out the case methodically. He presented the forged insurance documents and had a forensic document examiner explain in clear language how the signature had been traced rather than written naturally. He showed the security footage from both cameras. He put Prue on the stand, and she described the man at the back door with the kind of precise, specific detail that comes from someone with an excellent memory and no reason to lie. My uncle's defense attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that my uncle had no documented expertise in document forgery. It was a thin argument. It got thinner when Mr. Hardin projected a series of text messages onto the courtroom screen, messages between my uncle and cousin, recovered from my cousin's phone, discussing the contamination plan with a directness that left almost no room for interpretation. One message, sent 3 days before the contaminated flour was found: "Once the health department closes her down, the policy kicks in. Make sure nothing points back." Another from my uncle to my cousin: "She'll lose the hotel contract. Without it, she can't cover payroll. She'll fold within 6 months. We just have to be patient and let it happen." A sound moved through the courtroom when those messages appeared on screen. Not quite a gasp. More like a collective intake of breath that happens when something confirms what people suspected but were hoping wasn't real. On the third day of the trial, Judge Tanaka called an unexpected recess. When we reconvened, her expression had shifted in a way that made the entire room go still before she'd said a single word. "New evidence has come to my attention during the court's review of supplemental records," she said. "I've determined it to be material to the matter before us. It will be entered into evidence." She nodded to the bailiff. What came out in the following 20 minutes restructured everything I thought I knew about my family. My Uncle Roy, the records showed, was not my aunt's biological brother. He had been adopted by my grandparents when he was 4 years old, 2 years before my aunt was born. My grandparents had never told their biological children. Not my aunt, not my father. The adoption had been handled quietly and the records sealed as was common in that era. My aunt had discovered the truth 4 years before her death during a genetics that was part of her cardiac workup. She had told no one, but she had told Ms. Ames. The sealed letter in Ms. Ames's files, opened only now because of the litigation, explained everything in my aunt's own words. She had written, "Roy has always believed he is entitled to what I built. He is not, he never was, not by blood and not by presence. He chose to be absent from my life for 20 years. The person who has earned this bakery is Senna, who showed up every morning and never once asked what was in it for her. If this letter is being read, it means someone has challenged my decision. I want the court to understand that my decision was not made in confusion or under any pressure. It was made with full knowledge of who my family is and what they are capable of." There was more. Ms. Ames produced records showing that my uncle had contacted her office 2 years before my aunt's death, attempting to arrange a meeting about estate planning updates. Ms. Ames had declined to facilitate this, documenting her reasons in a written memo. Shortly after that meeting attempt, a business partnership amendment had appeared, a document that would have given my uncle a 30% ownership stake in Clover and Crumb, bearing my aunt's signature. My aunt had contacted Ms. Ames immediately. It was a forgery. My aunt had reported it, quietly, to her attorney, and the entire episode had been documented and sealed in the event of any future dispute. My uncle had tried this before. He had tried to steal from my aunt while she was still alive. She had seen it coming, she had prepared for it, and she had protected me from a threat I didn't even know existed. Judge Tanaka's gavel came down before either defense attorney could fully respond. My uncle and cousin changed their pleas before the defense rested. My uncle pled guilty to document forgery, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit food tampering. My cousin pled guilty to criminal trespass, food tampering, and conspiracy. The sentences were not lenient. My uncle received 6 years. My cousin received 4, with mandatory counseling. Both were ordered to pay full restitution covering my losses during the closure, the wholesale contract I'd had to renegotiate at a reduced rate, and my legal costs. The insurance company filed its own separate fraud action. I didn't cry when the gavel came down. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt something I've tried to name since, like I had finally set down something heavy that I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying. My father and I talked for a long time that evening. He was quiet the way he gets when he's working through something painful, and eventually he said, "I didn't know about Roy. Any of it." I believed him. My aunt had carried that knowledge the way she carried most difficult things, quietly, practically, without burdening anyone else until there was no other option. I went back to Clover and Crumb 3 weeks later. We'd reopened after the investigation cleared us, but I hadn't been in the kitchen since the trial. I came in early before anyone arrived and stood in the space my aunt and I had shared for 4 years, the flour in the bins, the laminator she'd bought secondhand and maintained so carefully that it still ran perfectly. The framed photograph above the espresso station of her and my grandfather, on the day she signed the original lease, both of them grinning like they'd gotten away with something wonderful. I had not lost this. I'd come terrifyingly close, but I had not lost it. Prue and I opened that Saturday the way we had every Saturday since my aunt had gotten too tired to do mornings. The line was around the corner before 7. Some of those people had been coming to Clover and Crumb since before I was born. Others had found us through the trial coverage, curious what the place was actually about. I stood at the pass and sent out tray after tray of the honey lavender scosens, my aunt's recipe unchanged, the way it will always be, and I felt her in that kitchen with me the way I always do, standing just off my left shoulder, watching. Quiet in that particular way of hers that meant she was satisfied with what she saw. "We're planning a second location. Prue is going to run it." I kept that idea quiet for months, not quite ready to say it out loud, as if speaking it too soon might make it fragile. But lately it feels less like a dream and more like simply the next thing on the list. My aunt always said the point wasn't to stay exactly the same. The point was to stay true. I'm still learning exactly what that means, but I have a kitchen that belongs to me, every inch of it, every recipe, every early morning, exactly the way she intended it to be. And some mornings, when the light comes through the front windows at just the right angle, and the whole place smells like butter and sugar and something warm, I'm almost certain she knows it.